Joining me now from Greenville, South Carolina, National Manager of Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty, Hannah Cox. Hannah, on the one hand, there are plenty of people who say, hey, this guy, Bowles, deserved to die. On the other hand, we heard his quote there, and that is, he told the FBI everything. Oh, really? We don't know that for sure, and now he's gone.
Well, I think that the way of looking at this is not whether or not someone deserves to die. I don't think that that is where our issues with the death penalty stems. I think we could have arguments all day about theoretically whether or not certain people deserve to die. But the problems with the death penalty are with the system as a whole. And the problems go back to the amount of innocent people that we found in the system. There's been one person exonerated from death row for every 10 executions in this country thus far. It goes back to the cost involved with the death penalty. It costs about $750,000 to $1 million more per case to carry out the death penalty than it does for life in prison without parole. And that's money that we're not spending on solving more crimes, which we do very little of in this country. And it's money that we're not spending on programs that actually could work to deter crime in the first place, which we know the death penalty does not.
So because of the system, let's talk about the cost. So because of the system, your argument is, I think that the estimate is it costs between $30,000 and $60,000 per year to house an inmate. We can stipulate that depending on which state. But you say because of the way the system operates in terms of the appellate process for death penalty cases, it's actually more expensive to taxpayers?
No, actually, the reason it's more expensive to taxpayers is because of the trial. About 70% of the cost of a death penalty case come from the trial alone, and
Right.
the trial's about 4 times more than the appellate process. So it's just the sense that this cases take so long to carry out a death penalty case that makes it so much more expensive. But it is far more than life without parole, and it's the most expensive part of the justice system on a per offender basis.
And the number one argument when Americans are polled, the number one argument against the death penalty is it saves taxpayer dollars. So you and your group would argue that that's simply not correct.
Not at all. I think people assume that it would be cheaper to have the death penalty because you're not paying to incarcerate someone as long. And a lot of people think that it's so expensive because it takes a long time to carry out. But the reality is that just simply having the trial is that much more expensive. Meaning, even if a jury doesn't give a death sentence, you're still spending a lot more taxpayer dollars even to pursue a death penalty case.
Federal government is now reinstating the death penalty after many years of it being in mothballs, if you will. In December and January, X amount of prisoners are slated to be executed. And the federal government and many governments have argued over the years that the death penalty is a deterrent. But we also have information that that may not be accurate either, that the death penalty being on the books, and it's been on the books as long as this nation has been a nation, really doesn't necessarily act as a deterrent, which is probably something that's rather hard to prove as well.
Right. We can't really say whether or not the death penalty works as a deterrent. We certainly don't try to say the opposite. What we can say is that if you look at regions that use the death penalty the most, they tend to have much higher rates of violent crime, whereas regions that don't use it or that get rid of it tend to see much lower rates of violent crime and even see crime fall.
The number one reason against the death penalty when Americans are polled once again is that it's immoral. And it's interesting because if you look over the years, Americans' appetite for capital punishment has diminished over the last 20-something years. 1994, fully 80% of Americans polled in favor of the death penalty. And now it's down, more than 20 years later to around 56% and appears to be dropping even further. You see this as part of a trend that's headed south of 50%?
I do. This year alone, we've had 11 states with Republican sponsored bills to repeal the death penalty. We've also seen 3 states in the past year get rid of it. So we're down to only 25 states that still have it at all. And of those, over a third haven't used it in a decade or more. Look, we're in the age of information. I think people are seeing how the system operates and they don't like it.
And some of the reason to keep people alive is because of the changing technology where we have DNA testing, for example, that didn't exist 30 years ago. So keep this person alive to figure out if there are more cold cases that could be solved.
Definitely. We've seen that, like I said, 1 in 10 has been found or at least been exonerated from death row since reinstatement. On top of that, we still only have DNA evidence in about 10% or less of cases. So it can be extremely helpful to go back and comb through old convictions and see if there were mistakes. But we're also still not in an age where we have a foolproof system. We know that mistakes are very possible, if not likely.
Law enforcement as a whole is in favor of the death penalty. So I would imagine that, when Americans look at law enforcement, they say, hey, they're pro-death penalty. This would probably be among your biggest pushback.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One American News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One American News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.